Well, Larry is a legend in the comic book world for his work on G.I. Joe and numerous other characters. A lot of people don't know that Larry is also a military veteran and a master of martial arts, having studied Kudokan, Judo, Kyudo, and Aikido, which is the Japanese art of drawing the sword. Larry's also an accomplished musician and actor. Hang on a minute. I'm going to clear my throat. I don't know why that's been bugging me lately. And Larry has appeared on Broadway several times, and he's also worked in film. I believe one of the films he worked in was The Warriors, which is beloved by all action movie aficionados. You were in The Warriors, weren't you, Larry?
Very briefly.
Yeah, well,
I worked on it. I worked on it over a week for night shoots, and then all the stuff with the gang that I was in was cut because
that's always fun.
Well, no, the guy that was supposed to have been the president of the Warriors broke his leg in the second week of production, and they had to rewrite pretty much everything.
Wow!
and scrap everything that he had been in, the scenes that he'd been in where he was still the president. So.
Wow.
That's a little bit of trivia most people don't know, I'm sure. Like a lot of New York comic book professionals, you began working with Wally Wood, didn't you?
Yeah.
And who was with Wally Wood at that time?
Oh, Gray Morrow, Ernie Colon, and through Woody, I met, even before I worked for him, I had met Al Williamson. Because there used to be this community of comic book artists on the Upper West Side of Manhattan in the late 50s and 60s, and that included Wally Wood and Al Williamson and half a dozen other creators. Sort of a comic book ghetto.
Yeah.
Of sorts. There's a feeling of community there. That they all knew each other. They hung out together.
Right.
They all ate at the same place.
But most people don't know that you're also a comic illustrator. I remember a title you did for Atlas.
Wolf the Barbarian.
That's right.
Well, no, I had to. I never considered myself a writer. I've always been drawing, and I sold my first cartoon to Castle of Frankenstein magazine when I was 16. So that's in the mid 60s.
Wow.
And then in the later 60s, I worked in undergrounds in New York. I had work in Gothic Blimp Works, which was sort of the Sunday funnies of the East Village Other. And the other creators that were, that was at first it was edited by Von Bodie, and then it was taken over by Trina Robbins and Kim Deach, and the other artists and writers that were represented in that tabloid were R. Crumb, Spain Rodriguez, Art Spiegelman, Jay Lynch. The entire spectrum of the early, underground guys, and also, young, the young upstarts like me and Michael Kaluta and Bernie Wrightson. We all got our first stuff printed in Gothic Blimp Works. Well, I knew Spain Rodriguez. I never, I think I met Crumb once, much later. But I knew Spain, and I knew Trina, and I knew Kim, and Jay Lynch and Jay Kinney, and I'd gone to the same high school with Art Spiegelman. So
Oh, wow.
And I went to the High School of Art and Design in New York City, which graduated more comic book artists than
Wow.
than any 10 other high schools put together. I mean, that was where Alex Toth went, Dick Giordano, Neil Adams, Joe Jusko, Joe Rubenstein, uh, the list. Oh, Frank Brunner, Ralph Reese. The list goes on and on. My illustration teacher for 2 years was Bernard Krigstein.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how good a school it was. Choosing the right school is really sort of important because, the reason people go to like Ivy League schools is that at those institutions you meet all the people you're going to,
Right.
interact with for the rest of your career.
Yeah.
And being an alumni of art and design throughout my career in advertising and comics and illustration, the percentage of people you meet that were also alumni were extremely high.
Yeah.
Was that your decision to attend art and design?
Well, yeah, you had to take a test.
Wow.
You had to take a test and go and submit a portfolio and do an interview. So, you were going to school with the very best there was in New York City. Unfortunately, New York has, sort of gotten rid of all that. They wanted to eliminate testing. So, so anybody can go, which
Right.
is a good thing and a bad thing, because a lot of what you learn, you learn from infusion and from osmosis from your fellow students.
Right.
Because you're all absorbing stuff and then you help each other out, being thrown into this stew I remember just looking around at other students working going, oh my God, how am I ever going to
keep up with that?
Keep up with that, because some of these people were really, really good. But that also brings home the point that, that innate talent isn't everything.
Right.
That a lot of the people that I thought were amazingly talented in drawing never pursued a career in art because they couldn't take the criticism. The first time somebody criticized them, they just folded. To get ahead in any of the arts, you got to be able to take it on the chin repeatedly.
Yeah.
Because people will constantly tell you that you suck. Late 1971 or early 72. I'd just gotten out of the army. Needed a job. I didn't want to go back to drawing shoes. So my friend Ralph Reese hooked me up with Wally Wood, and I became his assistant. I, would autograph pages and look up scrap and do backgrounds, and the first thing he did was he taught me how to letter. He taught me the Gaspar Celestino alphabet, and because he said, look, if I can't teach you how to letter, I can't teach you how to ink. This is all
interesting.
Steps, because mastering lettering means that you're mastering these aspects of the tool. You can make a clean stroke down, clean strokes this way, and a clean curve.
Right.
With a pen, a chisel point pen, and mastering the use of that tool is the first step. I remember after a few weeks of working for him, I said, "Gee, Woody, I've been working on all these samples, to try to get comic work. Could you take a look at my portfolio and give me some feedback?" And he looked at me and he said, "Listen, kid, I'll tell you when it stops sucking."
Oh boy.
I thought your style on Wolf the Barbarian was very intriguing, and I wanted to see more. I wonder why you never pursued illustrating comics full time.
Well, I did. I couldn't get any work writing. I had to draw. I was drawing. I was drawing comics. I was drawing for National Lampoon with Ralph Reese. We did, dozens, a bunch of stories for National Lampoon. We did stuff for Children's Television Workshop, and I had a table at Continuity. I sat next to Neil Adams for 3 years, and so a good deal of my time was spent drawing storyboards and motion boards, all of which were inked by Neil.
Oh, wow.
That was a big, a big lesson, that, when somebody who's really good, inks and corrects your stuff, you learn an awful lot. You learn, basically you learn what to stop doing. Don't do that anymore.
Continuity and Wally Wood were kind of rites of passage for many comic book illustrators in New York, just as Dan Adkins was for comic book illustrators in Ohio.
Well, Dan Adkins came through the Wally Wood studio.
He did.
Yeah. Dan Adkins was a Wally Wood assistant.
Oh, wow.
In the 60s. So was Ralph Reese. So was Wayne Howard, Paul Kirshner, a whole bunch of guys. And an entire army of comic book people passed through Neil Adams' studio. I mean, he needed warm bodies in their penciling.
Yeah.
And so you had Carl Potts and Pat Broderick and Bob McLeod and Terry Austin and Bob Wyacek, and scores of others.
Was Val Mayerick among them?
Val Mayerick, he was at the studio a lot because his wife at that time, Polly Law, was a colorist at Continuity. And so was Lynn, what was her last name?
Farley?
Yeah, Lynn Varley and Polly Law were the principal colorists at a certain time at Continuity. So, they sat there with a big box of AD markers, colored all the storyboards and motion boards.
How'd you get into Marvel?
Well, I got into DC first because Neil Adams was entrenched in DC, and he basically stuck his foot in the door and kept it open for a bunch of people. I mean, he's the one that got DC to use Jeff Jones for covers.
Oh.
He got Mike Kaluta in there. He got Bernie Wrightson in there. Because these are all people that they didn't have styles that looked anything at all like what DC had been doing.
Yeah.
I mean, both houses had house styles. I mean, at DC, if you looked like Schaffenberger or Gil Kane or any of these other guys, that seemed, or Carmine Infantino, there was a look, and at Marvel, your yardstick was John Romita Sr.
Yeah.
And these more illustrative styles, were like, the editors at that time didn't know what to do with them. I remember when Michael Golden showed up at DC, all the other editors said, "Oh, this stuff is too cartoony. This looks like kiddie stuff. Can't use it." And I was an editor at DC at that time, and so was Al Milgrom. And both Milgrom and I looked at his work and went, "Holy smoke!"
Yeah.
We got to lock the door and make sure he doesn't leave the building until we get him a script. basically.
His
And
Batman stories are unforgettable.
yeah, well, Milgram gave him his actual first job, which was a Batmite story. It was like a short
Perfect.
Batmite story, and then while he was doing that, I convinced Russ Heath to ink Michael Golden on Mr. Miracle. So I got him to do 2 issues of Mr. Miracle, both inked by Russ Heath, and only one of them was ever printed. So DC's, since 1978, has been sitting on a Mr. Miracle story, an entire finished book, penciled by Michael Golden and inked by Russ Heath.
It's insane that they don't put that out.
But a lot of companies have some amazing stuff sitting there.
Yeah.
That they don't. That the editors that procured this stuff are long gone, and the current regime has no idea what's sitting in those inventory drawers.
Most comic book fans associate you with G.I. Joe more than any other title.
And that and Wolverine, probably, yeah.
Yeah.
You were probably the most prolific writer of G.I. Joe. How did you come by that gig?
I was the last person they asked.
Didn't you pitch an idea for Fury Force or something like that?
A year before that, I pitched an idea called Fury Force, which is like the son of Sergeant Fury, who's like a Green Beret, NCO, and he has this special team of anti-terrorist force that operates out of a secret headquarters that's under the chaplain's assistant school in Staten Island. And that was rejected soundly by Marvel. They said, no, we can't sell this stuff. So a year later, Hasbro comes to Marvel and they want a Marvel comic of G.I. Joe. So I think it was Shooter asked every contract writer, and all the contract writers turned it down, and he asked all the non-contract writers, and they all turned it down. And then he went from office to office, editorial office, asking the editors, assistant editors, and anybody else who was hanging out in the office if they wanted to write this book, and they all turned it down because nobody thought a military comic would go. Plus, it was a licensed book, and licensed books were the bottom of the barrel. They paid the lowest rates because they took the licensing fee off the top of the page rate.
Right.
Which meant that if you were an A-list artist or a B-list artist, even, why would you spit in your wallet to work on a licensed book?
Yeah.
You'd be making less than your page rate. But I've been trying to get writing work from Marvel for a year, and nobody would give me any writing work. They would say, "Oh, you're a penciler. You're an artist. You can't write," which is logical since all the editors were writers.
Yeah.
And they were in the business of giving each other work.
Yeah.
Military background made you perfectly suited to write G.I. Joe, and it probably
that was totally by accident, though. I mean,
I know it was.
I was literally the last person they asked.
I know.
And I had been trying to get writing work, and I've said this 1,000 times. If they had offered me Barbie, I would have taken Barbie just to get my foot in the door for writing. I remember handing in that first script and thinking, "Oh, geez, I've shot my wad. I have no idea how to, keep going with this." And I felt like that with every single issue I've ever written. I'm in the midst of writing number 302.
Oh, wow.
And I still feel the same way. Like I'm jumping into the deep end of the pool with no life preserver. But also, getting back to what Mike was saying, this was in 1982. I'd been out of the service for over 10 years. everything had changed. You know, the SOPs and the uniforms and all the equipment, everything was different. So I still had to do a lot of research, and I had good contacts for that. I had a friend of mine, Lee Russell, had done 2 tours in Vietnam, the engineers, and he was one of these guys who was sort of a buff, a lot of guys get drafted, or they're in the army, and they, a tank goes by and they go, oh, it's a tank, but he knew but Lee would know, oh, that was an M something, and with the air cav modifications.
Yeah.
I remember one issue you did when somebody pulls a 45 automatic on the protagonist, and the protagonist reached out and released the magazine from the bottom of the pistol. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Well, that's something you could, if you grab a 45 auto from the top on the slide and you push on it, it becomes impossible for them to fire it, and you reach down with your index finger and press the magazine release. If the arm is held upright like this, and the pistol is in fairly good condition, the magazine just drops out. Most combat 45s are Chevy to do that. You want to be able to just drop your magazine without having to pull it out,
right?
Right.
So that you can just drop it and boom, So if you do that, you drop the magazine, and then you push back on the slide, you can lock it open. It ejects around, it's in the chamber, and it locks it open. So you've got an inoperable firearm. I wouldn't recommend doing it in real life.
No.
Yeah.
Most comic book writers don't have any experience with guns.
No, but what I actually did was I took out my own 45 and I
did it.
Made sure that it actually worked.
Yeah.
And you're right. A lot of people, who write or draw comics, don't know how the stuff works. That's why I did write a short piece on firearm and explosive facts for comic writers.
Yeah.
Because I was always bothered by the constant repetition of misinformation, like the acrid stench of cordite. I mean, that always bugged me. I mean, I think because Conan Doyle used it, I think and after Conan Doyle used it, every crime writer and mystery writer would say, refer to the acrid stench of cordite. But they stopped using cordite when they invented smokeless powder, something like in 1892 or something like that.
Yeah.
There's no cordite in any modern firearm ammunition.
The article that you wrote, where was it published?
The which? Oh, it wasn't published. It was just a flyer sheet that I handed out to writers.
Yeah. I don't very much still have it.
Very much like the Wally Wood's 22 panels.
Oh yeah, well that's has lived on, thank God. I don't suppose you still have the essay that you wrote.
Yeah, I have it digitally someplace. Yeah,
I would love to see that.
It's all about things like, you can't put a silencer on a revolver.
Yeah,
and nomenclature. It's like it's a magazine. Not a clip. A clip is something different. A silencer is a misnomer. It's a suppressor.
Yeah.
Things like that. Because a lot of stuff has been just promulgated and passed on. And it's wrong. It bugs me. I still see in movies and TV shows snipers, attaching a scope and then using it. right away. And then after they've attached the scope, they're fiddling with the knobs. And in half those cases, the supposed knobs they're fiddling with are the protective covers that keep you from messing with the settings of the actual knobs. You have to unscrew those things. So all they're doing is like unscrewing and screwing
Yeah.
back on the covers, and it's like, man. But if you put a scope on a rifle, you have to go out to the range and you have to zero that thing.
Yeah.
Because it's going to, the scope isn't automatically going to align, with your barrel. You have to make it align.
Yeah.
Did you see American Sniper?
I think so, a while ago. Yeah.
Do you recall if they got it right?
They got a lot of this stuff right, but again, the most egregious thing that they get wrong in sniper movies is like the image they see through the scope. I mean, if you can see a person's face through a rifle scope, you're close enough to like hit them with a brick.
Right.
If your target is 200, 300 yards away, their head is going to be like a pinpoint in that scope.
I just watched a movie called The Red Ghost, Nazi Killer. It's a Russian movie about a Russian sniper during World War II. Mm-hmm. And from his position several hundred yards away, he drops 5 guys with 5 shots.
Well, that's not impossible,
Yeah.
I mean, Carlos Hathcock, did better than that in Vietnam. He was like, I think, the highest scoring sniper in Vietnam. He took out a VC officer at over a mile.
Wow.
Yeah, but he had with a Ma Deuce 50 caliber with a scope mounted on it, and the darn thing doesn't even have a trigger, let alone a set trigger. It's got a spade that you have to push with your thumb. And you can't really set it for single shot. You just got to do it the correct pressure. And he dropped the guy. There's some stuff that you see in those sniper movies that are totally, the whole thing about, shooting right through the scope.
Right.
The bullet going right through the guy's eye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Saving Private Ryan is an example of that.
Well, Saving Private Ryan, they had a left-handed sniper in World War II, which was like, no. You had to be right-handed to qualify for sniper school. Because everything ejects is on the right, right? And if you watch Private Ryan, he's shooting a bolt-action rifle left-handed, and the bolt is on the right. So, he's got to like, the machinations he has to go through to reload it are totally impractical.
Well, boy, that, I thought that was a neat scene. Now it's weird.
I know.
Carlos Hathcock was the inspiration for Stephen Hunter's Bob Lee Swagger.
Right.
Are you a Stephen Hunter fan?
I've read the stuff, but Hathcock actually was injured fairly severely at the end of his last tour. Severe burns.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and that's when he became an instructor, I think, at the U.S. Army Marksmanship Program, and I believe it was at Benning at the time. Yeah.
Your martial arts experience has also affected the way you write or draw fight scenes.
I like to have cause and effect in my fight scenes. I think the turning point in American audiences with this type of fight visualization happened after The Matrix. Because prior to The Matrix, the majority of fight scenes in American movies were more balletic. They were intercuts. Like I would like swing, and then you'd cut to like a guy, right?
Right.
That's how they did it. Yeah.
You've seen The Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Yeah.
That's probably the most realistic fight scene I've ever seen in a movie.
Yeah, but that was because it was closer to the the Asian martial arts movie type of action where you see both figures.
Yep.
Right.
You see the whole action, and it's not boom 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 intercut.
No,
you
it
see
was also
cuts.
realistic because they're clumsy, they miss, they end up tussling on the floor and rolling around.
Yeah, and when the Matrix happens, all of a sudden the American audience is seeing exactly how it's done, the cause and effect.
Right.
And they're full figures filling the frame.
Well, Chinese cinema had been doing that for a couple of decades before The Matrix.
Sure.
And of course, Bruce Lee came out before The Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
So there were examples of beautifully choreographed fight scenes. I'm not saying they're realistic, but to the audience, they were a revelation because you could see the moves unfolding in real time and know that the actors weren't pulling any tricks or special effects legerdemain.
Exactly. And that's, once that genie was out of the bottle, you couldn't stuff it back in. It's very, it's unheard of to be able to do a fight scene the way they would do a fight scene in an old John Wayne movie anymore.
Right.
And The Matrix is the watershed.
Thing you try to have the cause and effect and everything with,
well,
even if it's fantastic.
Yeah. I like that. See the cause and effect, and I like to see it, clearly shown in the visuals.
Right.
To me, it always bothered me about captions that explain.
They explain it.
What's supposed to be going on in the picture.
Show don't tell.
Yeah, that when I started doing G.I. Joe, I didn't use any captions or thought balloons, which was sort of anathema at the time.
Right.
Because in 1982, comics were extremely caption heavy.
Right.
Stealthily he entered the room as the ambient rays of moonlight streamed across. And I'm going, you should show that in the picture, not explain it. You should absorb the story the way you absorb a movie, through the dialogue.
Exactly.
And the action.
And from what you see.
Right, from what you see. And, there's a lot of writers, comic writers out there who don't have that good a visual sense, I guess, because, you run into like 6 pages in a row of people sitting in a room talking.
Right.
Explaining the plot.
Well, I hate to tell you this, but a lot of modern comics are still extremely caption heavy, to the point where the words blot out the pictures on some pages.
That's what happened to me. I was doing a comic. I had spent an entire day doing this elaborate background, for the Himalayas and clouds scudding and, rays of sunlight streaming through these clouds and mists in the valley and all that stuff. And the writer decided to cover it all up with something like 10 captions. All the captions were doing was describing the stuff that was being covered by the captions.
Well, there's something about the comic book form that encourages novices to look at a panel and say, well, there's a panel, I better put some words there.
Right.
Yeah.
I write plots. I describe what's going on, and then the artist draws it, and then I go back in and I put in the dialogue and the transitional captions, which are always things like the next day.
Right.
Or, meanwhile, in Vladivostok, I think you still need those types of captions.
Oh, you don't write full script?
No, I don't. I've never written full script because I like to give the artist as much leeway as possible. I don't know how to write a full script.
Well, I always write full script, but I'm aware of visual storytelling, so they're not very verbose. And the reason I do that is sometimes it's important for the artist to know what the character is saying so that he can draw him correctly or help him act appropriately.
Right. Well, so yeah, but there's a lot of writers who do not have a visual sense,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And I remember getting a script once where the writer said, "Okay, in this panel, J. Jonah Jameson is looking out his office window on the 38th floor of down at the street, and 38 floors down, Peter Parker is coming down the sidewalk, and Peter Parker is looking into a wastebasket on the corner of the street, and in the wastebasket there's a copy of the Daily Bugle, and on the front page of the Daily Bugle there's this headline that reads blah blah blah." And I called the editor and I said, you can't get that into one panel.
Yeah.
You know? And the editor was like, "Why not?" And I spent 15 or 20 minutes trying to explain why that was impossible to do.
You just need 2 insert panels.
And people either have a visual sense or they don't
Yeah.
have a visual sense. I did work on a movie once called The Wanderers, about
I love
gangs
that movie.
in the Bronx, where the lead character was supposed to, be a would-be cartoonist. So I had to draw everything that he was supposed to be drawing. And in one scene, he's on the phone talking to his girlfriend, and he's drawing her head on the wall as he's talking to her. And so they set it up so that I had to crouch behind the guy with my head under his left armpit, and my arm through the sleeve of his jacket, and so that you saw his head, his head, and my hand.
Yeah.
And I had to had to look at and draw at an angle like this,
Yeah.
And so, I'm drawing this, and I got the girl's picture in my left hand, trying to draw her on the wall. And the director said, it doesn't look natural. I can't get it to, And I'm thinking, of course you can't make it look natural.
I think that was Richard Price's first novel.
Yeah, it was a Richard Price thing.
And it contains the unforgettable line, "The Wongs are watching, the Wongs are waiting. When the time is right, the Wongs will make their move."
Well, the thing is that the director got so frustrated, he said, "Okay, scrap this idea." And he takes the pencil out of my hand and he hands it to the actor, which is like a 17-year-old kid. He says, "Okay, that's not going to work. Here, you look at the picture and then you draw her face yourself." And the kid looks at him and goes, "What? I can't draw." And the director said, "Well, just do it." And the entire crew is standing there telling the director, "The kid can't draw." And the guy, here he was directing a movie, and he couldn't understand that this was impossible. It was mind-boggling.
What happened to that scene?
I don't know. I've seen the movie, but I think they ended up using the footage with my hand in it.
Now I want to see it again.
Should have given you a sniper scope. Then you could have seen everything perfect.
What are some other films you were in?
I did more TV. I was in MASH. I was in Another World, a soap opera. I was on Saturday Night Live and the Apocalypse Now skit. with
Right.
Martin Sheen. Did a lot of commercials. I did a Subaru commercial. It was national.
Did
What
you have a
else?
SAG membership?
Oh, I still member SAG. Yeah, I've been in SAG since 1976.
So you
And
still have your SAG membership is still active.
oh yeah, I pay my dues every year. I pay my dues to SAG, Equity, and AFTRA. Yeah, I'm a proud union member.
Yeah.
Larry, have you ever considered writing prose?
I tried a couple of times. I had an agent who was also, James Patterson's agent at the time, and I wrote a Chinatown noir novel. The agent sent it around to all the publishers, and they all said, "Oh, this is really good, but we can't possibly sell something in this genre with an Asian protagonist." And I said, "Wait a second, Charlie Chan and Mr. Moto didn't count."
Yeah.
Do you still
And it
have
was,
that manuscript?
oh yeah, and I've updated it a few times. I wrote it over 20 years ago, and but then the agent said, "Look, there was a scene in the middle of the novel where there's a scene with this serial killer in this basement in Staten Island. That he said was really scary, and that maybe I should try horror. So I wrote a vampire novel with a teenage protagonist who was half Irish and half Puerto Rican, named Eamon Diaz. The publishers all said, "Well, this is pretty good, but nobody will ever be interested in teenage vampires." This is about 3 years before,
Twilight.
Yeah, right. The way I got the agent was that Patricia Burke, who was a VP of Literary Acquisitions at Paramount, read my Chinatown noir novel, and she's the one who got me the agent. And she also sent it to Chow Yun Fat. If he was interested in it, they could package it, right? And unfortunately, that happened right, before The King and I was released, and it was like a major, major flop.
Yeah.
I think it was it Jodie Foster was in it with him?
You're not talking about a remake of the musical.
Yes.
Yeah.
I had no idea such a thing even existed.
Yeah, and it was, well, the reason why is because it was it lasted maybe 2 days at the theater.
I see.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, everything with Chow Yun Fat connected to it, was anathema. Getting a movie done is so difficult.
Yeah.
I created a character, a book for Marvel back then called Mort the Dead Teenager, because it was at a time when Marvel was sort of was in hock, basically.
Yeah.
They had signed deals for all these movie deals, and nobody was making the movies.
Yeah.
Cameron was sitting on Spider-Man, and nothing was coming out. Meanwhile, DC was churning out Batmans left and right.
Yeah.
So I went to an editorial meeting at Marvel, and I said, "Look, all our characters are mortgaged. They've got deals pending on them, and nobody's making these movies. Why don't we create some new characters that could be made into movies for cheap, that don't require really expensive special effects?"
Yeah.
So they said, "Well, what do you got?" And off the top of my head, I said, "How about something like Mort the Dead Teenager?" That's all I had was a title.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, they all said, "Great, go ahead and do it." So I had to come up with this thing. Sold maybe 20 copies.
So it was
but
published.
one copy ended up on Steven Spielberg's desk.
Nice.
And Spielberg loved it. And DreamWorks wanted to option Morta the Teenager, and Marvel wasn't returning their calls
Oh,
because what I didn't know at the time was that because Marvel was on the block, they were trying to sell it,
yeah,
and a media company like Marvel or DC, its value is linked to the value of their IPs, their characters,
right.
right? So if somebody makes a movie of one of your characters and it tanks, it
Yeah.
devalues your entire line. So
Yep.
they were quashing any movie deals because they didn't want to have something come out and suck.
Right.
I get a call from DreamWorks. They said, "How come? What's wrong with Marvel? They're not even, they're not responding." I tried to explain what the situation was, and they said, "Look, would it help if we had Steven talk to Stan?" I said, "Well, I'll ask Stan." So I call up Stan Lee, and I said, because Stan Lee had written me a note when the first issue of Mort came out, saying that he loved the book. I only ever got 2 notes from Stan telling me he liked my what I was putting out. And that was for Mort the Dead Teenager and for the Nom.
Right. Nice.
That was one thing about Stan. He had a good eye.
Yeah.
Stan says, if I were to have lunch with Steven Spielberg tomorrow about Mort the Dead Teenager, I'd get up on a plane the next morning and fly out back to New York and go have lunch with the Suits and Marvel. And the first thing I'd say would be, yesterday when I was having lunch with Steven Spielberg, he asked me, "What the heck is going on with Mort the Dead Teenager?" So eventually they cut a deal and DreamWorks optioned the comic, and I got to co-write a screenplay for it, and I got paid.
Nice.
But then the director that I co-wrote it with had his movie come out, and it tanked, and that sort of killed the project until about 2 years later, when Quentin Tarantino and Madonna decided they really liked the book, the concept, and they put their money into making a fake trailer to try to sell it, and even that didn't fly. I had a property that Steven Spielberg, Quentin Tarantino, and Madonna all wanted to make,
Right.
and they couldn't make it fly. Well, I've written 8 screenplays that I've been paid for.
Yeah.
And none of them have been made. 2 that I co-wrote were made as really low budget indie features.
How'd they turn out? Were you happy with them?
Yeah, well, the last one I did was Ghost Source Zero with Mark Cheng, and we crowdsourced that, and we fulfilled it. We came in, we finished the movie, and miraculously we got distribution from Sony in China, Japan, and Korea.
Did you say Code Source Zero?
Ghost Source Zero.
Ghost Source Zero.
You can see it on YouTube, I think. It was all shot in New York and New Jersey.
Nice.
Were you in it?
No.
No.
Neil Adams is in it.
Oh, wow.
He plays a computer expert, actually, and he was really good.
How bad? What do you got coming up? Is there anything you want the folks to know
that you're allowed to talk about?
Well, that's a problem.
I know.
Everything's like covered by NDAs these days.
Yep.
I can't say that a G.I. Joe is going to continue. I just can't say where. I've been working on a couple of graphic novel projects. I just got a deal offer on 3 100-page graphic novels from the publisher. I got 2 NFT projects I've been working on, and I've been busy.
Fun. Well, is there anywhere you like people to follow your stuff online?
I have a Facebook page. I have a fan page, and I have a personal page.
All
I
right.
have a fan page called Larry, been faking it all my life, HAMA.
He's so arrogant.
Well, that's the thing. Is that, I always felt that I've been faking it, because I actually really don't know how to do anything. You just have to, like I said before, jump in the deep end of the pool. And see if you can swim it. The other analogy I make is, when the train comes in the station, you better get on it, because you don't know when that train is ever going to stop at your station again.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's, how I got into acting, totally by accident. I got into comics totally by accident. I'd wanted to be a fashion designer as a kid. And, I in junior high school, I had a subscription to Vogue.
Wow.
And I got to High School of Art and Design, and my first day there, I'm sitting in the cafeteria, and this kid comes up to me and he says, "Hey, do you like comics?" And I said, "No." He said, "But I do." and he started talking, and he was very convincing. He said, I know some real cartoonists. You want to go visit a real cartoonist? And he dragged me over to that day. He dragged me over to Larry Ivy's house, who was putting out a book called Larry Ivy's Monsters and Heroes. And he was a major fan. He did some freelance work for Wally Wood. And, that's how I ended up meeting Wally Wood. At Larry Ivy's house is where I met Bon Voti. I met Jeff Jones and Jeff and Wheezy Jones at Larry Ivy's house. I met, everybody that was in that Upper West Side community. And if it hadn't been for this kid, who I'm still friends with, his name was J.D. Smith.
Oh, wow.
And he's a custom knife maker in Boston now. I thought he could draw rings around me all throughout high school. And he was one of the early Wally Wood assistants. But JD never went into comics, but it was his interest, and his brazenness that he dragged me along to all these places. Like one day he said, "Hey, let's go visit Mad Magazine." I go, "We can just walk in." I said, "Sure, come on." And we go, and he was really charming. He'd say, "Oh, can we come in and look at the covers on the wall?" Because they had all the covers,
Wow.
like Kelly Freas paintings framed on the walls. And we'd go in there, and they let us hang out in the hall and stare at the paintings. And we would stare at Kelly Freas's Block of Ice painting that he did for a cover for Mad.
Wow.
And we'd just stare at it like half an hour. And sometimes the artist would come in. That's where I first met Sergio Aragones.
Wow.
At the Mad office. And then one day, JD says, "Hey, let's go visit Help magazine," which is what Harvey Kurtzman was putting out. So we go to, and these were all within walking distances of the High School of Art and Design.
Wow.
So we walked 3 blocks to where Help magazine was on, I think it was on Madison. Just one tiny little office, one room with a drawing table and a desk and a file cabinet. And sitting at the drawing table was Terry Gilliam. And sitting at the reception desk was Gloria Steinem.
Wow.
Talking with Terry Gilliam. And he had a deal with Harvey Kurtzman. He had just gotten out of the Army, I think, and he needed a job. So he was art directing Help magazine for room and board.
Wow.
He had a cot set up in Kurtzman's attic up in Yonkers. And Kurtzman's wife would make him breakfast every morning, and he was on his own for the rest of the day.
Sounds like a good deal.
And it was part of his job at help him and Gloria Steinem would seek out celebrities to be on the cover for free, right? So, and Gloria Steinem was really charming. She was able to get some really big names to be on the covers, and they were doing fumettis at the time, which were comics done with photo funnies.
Yeah.
Sort of. And they would get, Woody Allen was in one of those. They got all sorts of comedians and actors to be in them, for no pay. And so they sent Terry Gilliam to some British comedy review in Manhattan, and he meets this guy named John Cleese. And he convinces John Cleese to be in one of these fumettis. And a few months later, help folds. And, Terry is out of a job. And he had remembered that, Cleese had said, look, if you come to England, look me up.
Wow.
And that was sort of part of the beginnings of Monty Python. In those days, you could you just walk into offices like that, and you can't do that anymore.
Nope.
Yeah.
Well, you remember, Mike. You could, if you went to Marvel, you could just once you got in past the receptionist, you could just go from office to office.
It's true.
And that's what people did. And,
and
that's what we had couches for. People would come in and just sit, and then go on to the next office. But that's how people networked and got jobs.
Yeah.
When Ditko would come in, he would always hang out in my office because I had known him through Wally Wood. He knew that he could hang out. He could hang out in my office and not be bothered by the Geek Squad. And I had an assistant editor named Pat Redding, who sort of intimidated all the the fanboys, so they didn't want to. She was my Cerberus.
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely check out Larry's Facebook pages, his personal, if he still has room, but definitely his fan page. My
personal page is full up.
Yeah,
I got like 5,000 friends, and I actually know about over 2,000 of them.
Wow. Yeah, but definitely do the fan, because I'm sure you'll be posting there when the new stuff is coming out and everything. Once you know,
I only post about that sort of stuff on the fan page.
Or on, yeah. So,
thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.